Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we go through the players the Timberwolves are signing to Summer League deals and Exhibit 10 contracts, a few intriguing undrafted players that'll be around this summer, and also a couple of notes on upcoming NBA free agency. We're just 2 days away, 2.5 days away from the start of free agency. Some of the big news coming out early in the week as we gear up for what the Wolves might be able to do later this week. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Tuesday, everybody. We're just a couple of days away from NBA free agency and gearing up for Summer League already, too. So plenty to talk about here today. First of all, big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as your favorite audio platform, whatever that might be. Apple, Google, Spotify, of course, our friends at Odyssey. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. And also at Beecken, which is my account with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, today on the show, I do want to get to some of the NBA free agency stuff, the Kyrie news, some of those things, what it could mean for the Wolves, what the free agency landscape looks like from a Wolves fan's perspective here in a little bit. So we will get to that. First, though, let's talk about some of the Summer League editions, the Exhibit 10 editions for the Timberwolves. I should also note, actually, here off the top, real quickly, the Timberwolves do have an intro presser today on Tuesday at 10 a.m. for their first three picks in the draft. So Spaniolo, I don't believe, will be there, the 50th pick in the draft, who will likely be stashed overseas, just 19 years old. But the first three selections, Kessler, Moore, Minette, will be at the Timberwolves presser this morning at 10 a.m. So perhaps once you're listening to this, it's already happened. If not, I'm sure it'll be on Timberwolves.com and YouTube. So go check that out, and we'll talk about anything notable that comes out of that. Usually, there's not a whole lot in terms of analysis because it's pretty, hey, I'm excited to get going, that sort of thing. We'll talk about it on Wednesday's show, of course. First, let's talk about some of the other Summer League and Exhibit 10 editions, and I'll explain Exhibit 10 if you're not familiar here in just a minute. We'll start with the Summer League editions and a couple of guys that if you're a college basketball fan, you've no doubt heard of because they played at big kind of blue blood programs. One is Theo John, who's actually a Minnesota native, played at Champlain Park High School with McKinley Wright, the former, well, I guess still technically current Timberwolf, although our friend Doogie Wolfson reports that McKinley Wright likely will not be back next year. Will probably play for another team in Summer League. But at any rate, Theo John, who played 4 years at Marquette and then transferred to Duke and was a rotation guy for Duke last year, obviously, got some. He was a starter, essentially a 3-year starter in 4 years at Marquette. Was not really like a big offensive force. Is a more of a versatile forward, 6'9", bigger body. Was a rotation guy for Duke, averaged 11 minutes a game. And is just a name that basketball fans of the Twin Cities should be familiar with, and certainly national, fans of ACC basketball are familiar with. Of course, he was requested to do a lot less at Duke than he was at Marquette. So, again, more of a bench rotation type guy, a good shot blocker. He had a block rate last year, 7%, which is really solid for a guy that's not necessarily a pure center. He's more of just a versatile big. Should be able to play the 4 at the NBA. Well, maybe not at the NBA level, but as a professional, and more of a depth guy, likely for Summer League. Pretty unlikely he ends up with this team longer term, but an intriguing story, a Minnesota native, and again, a Summer League contract for Theo John. Another player that you may have heard of if you followed, especially if you followed March Madness, an NCAA champion in big man David McCormick, played for 4 years and was a starter for the better part of that career, about 3.5 years, and averaged 10 and 7 this year as a junior, averaged 13 and 6. An efficient offensive player, kind of more of your, power forward center type hybrid, very good rebounder, had an 18% total rebound rate this year, had a 17% offensive rebound rate, not a massive shot blocker, not in terms of block rate, not nearly like, say, what Theo John did. But he should have the ability to be a 4 small ball 5 type player at the professional level. He's a little bit more intriguing than Theo John in my mind because I think, the Wolves are looking for size, right? He's a legit 6'10", 6'11". Was a big time player at a big time program, played top flight competition for his entire collegiate career, and should have a possibility of sticking in some form or fashion, whether that's a two-way or perhaps he gets elevated to an Exhibit 10 contract moving forward. But he'll be on the summer league team in Vegas as well. So he would be a name I'd say to watch out for. We don't, of course, the Timberwolves have not announced their summer league roster, so I should actually say these are reports, right? This isn't official from the Wolves. So the Theo John report was from Shams Charania at The Athletic. McCormick was reported by Chris B. Haynes. So we don't actually have confirmation from the team, and no local sources have reported, at least not reported McCormick. I think Doogie Wolfson verified the Theo John news. So if McCormick's indeed on the team, I think he could be an intriguing name to watch. And again, once the official summer league roster is released, I want to lock in on I'll probably draw out 2, 3, 4 names to really watch out for. So like last summer, it was McKinley Wright. It was Isaiah Miller, who I believe I saw actually just signed with maybe the Warriors summer league for summer league. But Isaiah Miller was a huge part of the Iowa Wolves last year and a player that I really liked. And there were a couple others that I noted to watch out for summer league because of course all those games are televised. The Wolves should have their draft selections playing in that tournament as well in Vegas. So those of course will be players to watch, but non-roster guys to watch. I'll pull those out and we'll highlight them as well. There's two more players I want to highlight. One is to me at the moment, based on what we know about the Timberwolves summer league roster, that I should say the two most intriguing players based on their histories. And one is an Exhibit 10 signee, which means we'll likely see him in Iowa this year and probably in training camp as well. So we're going to get to that here in just a second. First, let's talk about our friends over at Rock Auto. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have a computer with access to rockauto.com both at home and in your pocket. You can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why would you choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? RockAuto.com is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and their prices are reliably low for every single customer. They have everything you could possibly need, from brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil to even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to RockAuto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck, right locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. All right, a couple of intriguing players to look out for this summer so far, based on what we know, the guys who we think will be on the summer roster. So again, there's like 4 guys announced, plus probably 3 of the draftees all on the roster. Kessler, Moore, and Minette, I would assume, would all play summer league. So a couple of other intriguing names. Keyvon Harris is interesting to me. He's a forward that was in the G League for the Raptors last year. He played 4 years at Stephen F. Austin. He had a year in there. I think he was maybe in the G League bubble for a little while in the 2021 season, or I guess fall of 20, whatever that weird like year in there. Not sure exactly. I couldn't find any stats for him in there. But then last year he played significant minutes for the Raptors G League team. But going back to what he did in college, he was a 4-year player at Stephen F. Austin, started for the majority of his career there. His last 2 seasons over his junior and senior year, he averaged over 17 points a game, about 17 and 6, and he shot the ball pretty well from the perimeter. For his career at Stephen F. Austin, he was 39.7%, was over 41% as a senior, so a solid three-point shooter. The scouting report on him is basically he's got good size for a swing forward. He's probably about 6'6", 6'7", and he's a solid defender. He's not ultra athletic, but he should have enough athleticism to stick at the NBA level, likely as a G League NBA fringe type guy. So an intriguing combination of skills. He improved as a shooter throughout his career. His free throw shooting percentage was poor early in his college career. He got it up to 77% as a senior. He's got solid touch. He can get his own shot. He's not a huge playmaker. He's more of like, he's going to be like your third offensive option, maybe second offensive option off the bench, but he has the ability to be a secondary playmaker. A lot of times in the G League, he would take over late, would kind of initiate offense late in the game, or they would run sets for him to get isolation or run pick and roll on the perimeter in the G League. So think of him as like a secondary creator who could play spot up shooter, be a little bit versatile defensively, kind of a 3-and-D light, where he's not an outstanding 3-point shooter and he's not an outstanding defender, but he could do both of those things. Really kind of more of a Swiss Army knife type player. He could do a little bit of everything. So 11 games last year with the Raptors G League team, he averaged 14 points in 27 minutes a game. He shot 47% from the floor, just a hair under 41% from three on about 5 attempts per game. Did shoot 79% at the free throw line. And again, for his size, is a good rebounder. His rebound rate in the G League last year was 11%, but it was 18% defensively. So he can really hound the defensive glass, use his, again, decent athleticism and decent size to wreak some havoc on the defensive glass. So I would see him more as a well-rounded Swiss Army knife type of player, versatile, can do multiple things, can play make a little bit, can catch and shoot, can play some defense, has solid athleticism. Not any one skill really sticks out as like, hey, this guy's fantastic at X. He's just pretty good at everything. And those are intriguing guys for me to watch in Summer League, because occasionally what teams will do is they'll bring guys like this in because they want to see if they can develop like, one of those additional skills. Can he take over a game in the Summer League? Can he, initiate offense in the Summer League? Can he be a lockdown defender in the Summer League? Because if he has that one NBA skill, then he becomes a two-way contract, somebody, a real candidate for a two-way contract. Or do they just want him to come in and fill a role and be solid in every aspect? Because that's all he's going to do anyway at the NBA level, right? I mean, you'd like to have some upside, somebody who's got, one or two clear NBA skills, but if they could do a little bit of everything, that's important. It is also important to note he did just turn 25 years old. So he's already 25, hasn't played in an NBA game, has just been in the G League, was a 4-year college player at a mid-major program with Stephen F. Austin. So the upside is pretty limited, but again, somebody who's good, good at pretty much everything on some level, can compete at a professional level in every aspect of the game. There could be a spot for him as I guess maybe not, teams generally like to use two-way contracts like guys that have some upside. So maybe it is more of an exhibit 10 type, hey, stash him in Iowa if we need him type of a thing. But again, well-rounded players are intriguing, and that's exactly what Keyvon Harris is. So keep an eye out for him. I feel like he's going to probably have a big impact on Summer League as somebody who's got the most, probably, I guess we don't know the full roster yet, but likely the most professional experience, or I should say most, the combination of playing 4 years in college, a couple of years now professionally otherwise. So he's somebody who's got a lot of experience headed into Vegas. The last player to talk about today is Phillip Wheeler. He's the only player that we know has signed an Exhibit 10 contract. Well, I should say, no, based on reports from Jonathan Givani at ESPN and John Krasinski locally. Phillip Wheeler is also a really intriguing prospect. We don't know a ton about him, although you can dig up some stuff from high school online. He's from New Jersey. He left high school before his senior year to play overseas. There apparently was some academic stuff where he was going to have a tough time getting into a 4-year school here in the U.S., so he chose to forego his last year of high school, play overseas in Italy, and then came back to Puerto Rico to play there professionally this last year. He's actually going to play in the Puerto Rican national team next week, although it sounds like he'll do that and then come back to Summer League just a few days after that. But his stats in the Puerto Rican League, which, modest competition, although there is a long list of guys who have had success in that league in the past, I should say NBA players who have had success in that league. His numbers there are great. I mean, 17 points per game, shot 51% from the field. This is over 29 games. So this isn't a tiny stint. This is essentially a full season, a full international season. 31 minutes a game, 17 points a game, 51% shooting overall from the floor, 33% from three, 72% from the line, average 6 rebounds per game. So, and I should say, in terms of his profile, he's more of a potential kind of stretch 3-4 combo. I think of him as a physical profile similar to Jaden McDaniels, where he's, maybe big enough to play the 4, but may play the 3 on a team like the Wolves that's trying to play big. Where he's a little bit lanky, He's only 20 years old. Remember, he left his senior year of high school in 19 to play overseas, 2019. So he's only 19, or excuse me, 20 years old, has a lot of projectability and upside. So the Exhibit 10 deal that he's signing means that he will play in summer league. He will play in training camp unless something changes. And if the Wolves ultimately do waive him and he comes back to play for the Iowa Wolves of the G League, he gets a $50,000 bonus. And there is like a guaranteed contract in there that's a little bit higher than your standard run of the mill G League salary. So the Exhibit 10 deal essentially means he's a preferred player headed into summer league, headed into training camp, headed into the fall and the Iowa Wolves season. The Wolves have had, I believe Isaiah Miller ended up on an Exhibit 10 last year. We've seen a handful of guys that have had NBA experience end up on Exhibit 10 deals because, again, it's essentially you do that for guys that you want to stick in your program. And perhaps this turns into a two-way. I mean, we've seen players, Jordan Mclaughlin is an example of somebody who came into summer league without a deal. Also, Naz Reid, both of those guys ended up getting contract offers because of their summer league play. Naz originally agreed to a two-way deal a couple of years ago. You may remember this when Gerson Rosas was running the team. But he played so well, he played his way out of a two-way deal and into a partially guaranteed multi-year contract, which obviously was a steal for the player that Naz Reid is. A very modest contract, almost identical to what Jalen Noel signed. And Jalen Noel was a second-round pick that year. And then Jordan McLaughlin's an example of somebody who came into summer league as simply an undrafted guy, had actually played a year in the G League. So actually similar to the player we just talked about, Keyvon Harris, where Keyvon Harris played 4 years at a mid-major. I guess Jordan McLaughlin played at USC, but 4 years of college, played a year in the G League, and then now is in summer league, and the Wolves could turn around and offer him a two-way. That's what they did with Jordan McLaughlin. McLaughlin's a similar profile. He was like 24 at the time, played 4 years at USC, played a year in the G League for Brooklyn and one other team's organization, G League team, and then ultimately signed a two-way deal with Minnesota. And then following another two-way deal, now he's actually in an NBA contract. So it's a little bit of an unusual path. Not typical to see older guys like that get a two-way and then ultimately find their way to an actual guaranteed NBA deal. But Keyvon Harris is somebody who could be trying to do that. Phillip Wheeler, on the flip side, is a 20-year-old upside play, somebody with a ton of athletic ability and a ton of projectability. If he can be a little more consistent on his jumper, be a little bit more consistent on the glass and defensively at the NBA level, the tools are there. And he's somebody who's got the talent level to potentially make a pro career at the G League and the NBA level. So Phillip Wheeler, if you're looking for upside plays, you could kind of come out of nowhere. Phillip Wheeler could be a guy to keep an eye on. All right, that's 4 players we know about that have been reported to be joining the Summer League team, plus Kessler, Moore, and Minot. I mean, that gives us, 7 guys? So there'll probably be another 5 or 6 announced here in the next week or so before Vegas Summer League. So again, once that roster is announced, we'll pull out some players beyond the Timberwolves' first and second round picks to keep an eye on as we go into Summer League play. And we'll, of course, cover that here on the show. Okay, we're going to close the show by talking a little bit of NBA free agency, the big news in the NBA over the past couple of days. And also, what could the Timberwolves' role be in free agency? What kind of cap space could they have? And what might this look like here as we get to Thursday evening and the start of NBA free agency? First, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL Stanley Cup Finals, which just concluded on Sunday night, I believe. The Avalanche won. And, of course, MLB, which is ongoing almost at midseason. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Of course, BetOnline.net is also the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, golf, and we're only like 6 weeks away from NFL preseason, which is nuts, but you can bet on that at betonline.net if that's your cup of tea. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's close the show by talking NBA free agency. So the Timberwolves, per a report from Darren Wolfson in the Twin Cities, he says, of course, of KSTP and Score North, he says that the Wolves do not plan to offer a qualifying offer to Josh Okogie. That means that instead of becoming a restricted free agent, they essentially are renouncing his cap hold. He'll become an unrestricted free agent this offseason. It makes sense because the contract, if he had accepted the qualifying offer, would have been something like $6 million, I believe. which is aggressive for a guy who was like your 10th player last year, 10th or 11th player. He'll find a role in an NBA roster. He might even get a little more than the minimum because he's that good of a defender, but don't expect him to sign a major offseason contract. Although, again, I do think he'll land on his feet, likely not in Minnesota, and certainly not for the qualifying offer. So that's a big piece of what the Wolves could potentially be able to do. There's actually an article over at ESPN, and let's see it's titled NBA Free Agency 2022, the 6 tiers of cap space for all 30 teams. This is by Bobby Marks, the former NBA front office guy. There's only 5 teams that actually do have real cap space headed into the offseason, and that's Detroit, Indiana, the Knicks, the Magic, and the Spurs. So, outside of, well, I mean, I guess they're all non-playoff teams, but obviously the Pistons are the talk of the offseason with their draft. The Knicks are the Knicks, so it's a little bit interesting. I never know what the Magic are doing. The Spurs are strangely about to trade DeJounte Murray, apparently, and the Pacers are, were one of the big disappointments last year, along with the Knicks. But all those 5 teams will have cap space. The Grizzlies likely will, assuming they let Tyus Jones and Kyle Anderson walk. And then the Timberwolves are in the 3rd tier, which is the wild cards, along with the Washington Wizards and Sacramento Kings, because they have guys that they could choose to keep and not have cap space. They have guys they could let go. Josh Okogie's one of them. So they create some cap space by letting him go. He would be the second biggest chunk of cap space, allows the Wolves to get that second biggest chunk. The biggest chunk is Taurean Prince, who has 16, 17 million expiring this year in unrestricted free agency. So with no Prince and no Okogie, and then also you add in Jake Layman and an even smaller deal in Greg Monroe, the Wolves do make themselves a little bit of cap space. I mean, there's a handful of guys they could look at, if they're still looking at guards, especially if they trade D'Angelo Russell. But again, knowing that they see Patrick Beverley more as a 2 guard who can operate the offense. But the Wolves, of course, went into last year with those 3 guys, right? With D'Lo, Patrick Beverley, and Jordan Mclaughlin as their point guards. McKinley Wright on a 2-way, but he never played true rotation minutes, even when they had guys hurt, right? Jalen Noel played guard. So I don't know that the Wolves are necessarily going to add a point guard in free agency, but if they can, they could look at a Tyus Jones or, somebody like that to a multi-year deal, either prepping for a D'Lo trade or just anticipating Patrick Beverley either, moving on after this year, being traded, et cetera. He's, of course, got a deal that expires next summer after he signed the extension this past year. So perhaps they do add a guard. The national perspective is, they're going to go after a guard. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think it all depends on the D'Lo situation, because remember, the Wolves don't need somebody who's going to necessarily run pick and roll every time down the court, which is one of the things Tyus is great at. Tyus is great at multiple things. And by the way, I'd love to have him on the Timberwolves. He's a great player. But Anthony Edwards is going to initiate a lot of offense. A lot of offense is going to go through Karl-Anthony Towns. They want guys that are more in the Patrick Beverley vein that can initiate offense, but also can hit a spot up 3 and play competitive defense. Jordan Mclaughlin kind of fits that too. He maybe doesn't have the size or defensive chops that you'd like to have in a perfect world, but that's why he fits this team well, because he can be a low usage guy that knocks down open shots, and et cetera. So that sort of a player is, I think, what they're looking for. In terms of, so I should say the Wolves are then one of the handful of teams that actually could have some real cap space. They also, if they fill that cap space, then could have the mid-level exception to play with. I believe they would have the biannual exception if they choose to go that route, but I think would probably find another, the roster is basically full now. But once you let Prince, Okogie, Layman, and Monroe go, and, you think about what you want to do with Naz Reid, Jalen Noel, I'd be shocked if the Wolves didn't exercise those options, but they could flip one of those guys for a future second, couple of seconds, maybe in Naz Reid's case, if they need to free a roster spot. There's ways you could do that. And the Wolves are obviously still looking to upgrade their depth. Leandro Balmaro, who, by the way, probably will also play Summer League. I didn't mention him earlier. He could have some trade value as well if they're trying to free a roster spot. So TBD on exactly what free agency looks like with the Wolves. They are really kind of on that cusp of how much cap space can we really create? Now, of course, the big news in the NBA, the Kyrie Irving stuff, which in turn could Kevin Durant be moved, found out late Monday after a day of rumors that Kyrie would not opt in, or they'd opt in and request a trade, or there'd be a sign and trade. Late Monday, Kyrie announces on Twitter that he's going to be opting in with some weird cryptic tweet. So he very likely, and he intends to play for the Nets this year. So he likely will play for the Nets this year, which means Durant is unlikely to be traded. But Irving only has 1 year now left on his deal. He's extension eligible here for the next couple of years. Do the Nets ultimately trade him? Do things fall apart there midseason? Either way, the Wolves aren't likely to be a player, certainly not for Kyrie Irving, because he's, even if in a vacuum he's a better player than D'Angelo Russell, he's not a better fit for the Wolves than even D'Angelo Russell. So I'd be really surprised if that were to ever happen. And I don't think this goes without saying. I think it's important to talk about because the Wolves have assets. They have good players. They're a playoff team. So they could be in the conversation for any of these guys. If Kyrie were to go somewhere else, could they make a play for Kevin Durant? I think everybody would make a play for Kevin Durant. That's a conversation we could really dig into later if we needed to. I think everyone but Anthony Edwards would be on the table, and that includes Karl-Anthony Towns. Because if you compare Kevin Durant with Anthony Edwards, I mean, why wouldn't you do that? But that's probably the only scenario in which you trade Karl-Anthony Towns is if you can land a top, 6th player in the league or something like that. So a conversation we could have if this thing comes back up again at this, Monday midday. I was thinking we'd spend more time about this on talking about it on Tuesday's show, but as it turns out, Kyrie's apparently coming back. Surely there will be more drama. I'm not about to assume that there won't be, but sitting here right now, it doesn't look like Kyrie or Kevin Durant are going anywhere at the moment, but we'll obviously keep an eye on that. So free agency starts Thursday evening, I believe 5 p.m. Central Time on Thursday. They've, of course, decided to make this more of a primetime event versus the midnight that it used to be on July 1st. So that is when deals or negotiations can begin. Of course, contracts can't actually be signed until next week, I think the 6th. But of course, we start to find out about everything late on, Thursday and into Friday. So keep an ear to the ground. Of course, anything could happen. If anything major breaks in the meantime, we'll of course do a quick, 1-minute video talking about any breaking news. And if anything major happens later this week, we'll of course do special shows as needed throughout the week and the weekend as well. That's all we have for you today. Thanks again for listening to Locked On Wolves. And for making us your first listen every day. It's greatly appreciated. Of course, you can watch on YouTube. You can also listen on Apple, Google, Spotify, or Odyssey. Also, really any platform. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Thanks again for listening to Locked On Wolves, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Podcast Network is your local experts on all your biggest stories. And while you're at it, you can make your second listen the Locked On NBA show. You can get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the NBA. Now's the perfect time of year headed into free agency in just 30 minutes every day with Locked On NBA. Again, Locked On NBA, your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.